Okay, so officially, welcome to the seventh teen webinar for this year. We're going to focus on April's topics. All of them relate to Jewish identity. So the standard topic is Israel and the Jewish spirit. The Musar topic is trust, bitachon. And the mixtape topic is Jewish pride. So, but before we even get to the discussion, I want to mention a couple of things. Chai Mitzvah plants trees in Israel for the teen program participants. So I sent out an email asking if you'd like trees planted for each student or for the teacher or for somebody that your group wants to honor. So if you could just email me back, if you haven't done it yet, let me know so that I can send it to JNF because they need time to print the certificates. We want to get them to you before the end of the year. And another great thing relating to this, JNF is happy to send a free speaker to you. If you want someone to talk about Israel or to talk about the environment, just send me an email and I'll send you the person in the JNF education department to contact and they will come out for free.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's really nice. And I'm also going to remind you, because I always do, to put stuff on Facebook. I actually just put an article on Facebook last Friday that relates to the topic we're going to do now. It's from the Jerusalem Post, and the headline is California Jewish Students Victorious in Battle Against Campus Discrimination. And then the subtitle is, as part of the settlement, San Francisco State University agreed to issue a statement affirming that it understands that for many Jews, Zionism is an important part of their identity. So that's something that relates very much to what we're going to discuss today. We'll look at the themes. So from the standard materials, which I think you're both doing, Jewish people live all over the world, and the relationship between individual Jewish people and Israel is complex.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it is very sure, yes. In fact, when I was working at JNF, we had education directors who said they didn't want to bring Israel into their schools because it was too controversial. And our response was, how do you have a Jewish school without ever mentioning Israel? But I will tell you that my daughter worked last year at a Jewish school that called it Palestine and didn't permit them to speak Hebrew on Yom HaAtzmaut. So
Wow.
There's a real range of people.
Wow.
Yeah. Even she who lived in Brooklyn at the time and has blue hair, even she couldn't, like, that wasn't even for her. But there's all kinds of people.
Wow.
So from the Musar materials, which are basically about faith, Israel has struggled with a tension between faith and self-reliance. And that paradox even played out in its Declaration of Independence. And from the mixtape, Jewish pride involves tikkun olam, distinct history, and an intellectual, emotional struggle. It's a lot of struggle involved in our relationships. And all of these ideas play out against an emotionally charged political background. And for the students, during a time of self-discovery. So they're putting together, they're becoming their Jewish identity. And they've got all this stuff going on. And so all these topics overlap, and they're all in time for Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut. So it's a big discussion to have at the time. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the diaspora, because the Chai Mitzvah materials focus on the spiritual or emotional connection to Israel. And our students, of course, are living in the diaspora. And this is going to influence their views. It might be interesting to ask your students how many of them have been to Israel or how many of them have relatives in Israel. But no matter what their degree of attachment is, there's no question that Israel is going to play some kind of a part in Jewish identity. So look for that article from the post on the Facebook page. And so I want to give this background on diaspora because when I first learned it a few years ago, I didn't know this. I thought it was really interesting. The word diaspora, this is a less interesting part of it. The word diaspora comes from the word disperse, dia, and spirin, scatter. So the Jewish diaspora is often said to have begun in 586 BCE when the kingdom of Judea was conquered by the Babylonians, who destroyed the ancient temple in Jerusalem and exiled the Jewish population. And ever since then, significant numbers of Jews have lived outside the land of Israel. And throughout history, many have expressed a deep longing to return to the Jewish homeland. But what's really interesting is that, nonetheless, beginning with a portion of the Judeans who in 538 BCE were permitted to return to their homeland, many chose to remain in Babylon. And Jews throughout exile, throughout history, have chosen to remain in foreign lands, and that shows what a complex and complicated relationship Jews living outside of Israel have historically had with the diaspora and with their homeland. It's very complex. And in the U.S., the complexity is even more complicated right now with what's going on with Omar and her recent statements about Jewish people and what's going on with in Congress and with the Democratic Party. So all of this is like our backdrop to our talk about Israel. Any comments?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of an interesting point that I think a Jewish diaspora actually begins with Joseph.
Interesting. That's what we're going to talk about next. You are so cool. Yeah.
Because Joseph also lived in the diaspora, and Joseph thrived there. And given the opportunity, Joseph stayed there and brought the rest of the family there.
True. Very well said. That's something to think about. And then we're also going to think about Jacob, who comes even before, because, he left not under good circumstances, but then he went back. And that's, and his name was changed to Israel. So that's something else to bring into it. But I love the idea of Joseph relating to the diaspora. That's something that is unusual and I haven't thought about. That's a cool idea. But let's look at the text from the standard materials that you guys will be doing about Jacob's name change to Israel and how we can relate that story to Jewish struggles and to our own experience. Jacob's wrestling match with the angel is a symbol of the struggle of the Jewish people. And after Jacob lives for years in the land of his wives, Leah and Rachel, God tells him, go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I'll be with you. And as we know, on his way, Jacob spends the night alone, and he's met by an angel who wrestles with him. And Jacob wins, and the angel blesses Jacob by changing his name to Israel. So in Jacob's wrestling match with the angel, it's symbolic of his overcoming personal challenges, and he becomes kind of a better person after that. So the name change from Jacob to Israel highlights his newfound ability to face his problems and overcome them. And after centuries of struggle, we can relate this to the Jewish people who have found refuge in the state of Israel. That's one way of looking at it. We can read the text. The angel saw that he could not prevail against Jacob. And the angel said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you have blessed me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have commanding power with an angel of God and with men, and you have prevailed. So this is a nice way to relate this to Israel being a place where we can go for refuge. And I feel like this is also a good time to just remember that whatever the kids, wherever the discussion goes, everybody should feel comfortable sharing their feelings. And this is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this video, but it's really cool. It's an interesting video, and it has a little bit of a different slant on the Jacob wrestling thing. It's from Godcast. Now that's Bim Bom. It's called Who Did Jacob Actually Wrestle? And it's kind of edgy. It's really interesting. And that the author, Dara Horn, suggests that it's not an angel that Jacob wrestled with, but his brother Esau. And whether you like the suggestion or not, it still comes to the same conclusion that Jacob becomes a wiser person as an outcome of the struggle. I'll send a link to this in case you want to use it with your kids, because it's kind of interesting. And then, so the conversation that's in our booklets really relates to this as well. And it's a nice way, if your kids are talking, to get them talking. What is a personal challenge? There are lots of different kinds. What are some examples of a personal challenge? And I was thinking about this, and I kept coming to adult personal challenges. There are challenges that relate to our, just keeping ourselves together, paying bills and that kind of thing. But a personal challenge, I think, should be more of like an emotional or a spiritual challenge. Any suggestions? Well, If I were a kid and I wanted to share, I might have something to do with my friends or my family. I mean, they are going through a lot of growth at this time. But you can even internalize it and not even share. Think about your own personal challenges. And you have a special place, either physical or spiritual, where you go for refuge. And I think the kids probably have their room. And we can compare that to the state of Israel. It's been a refuge for Jewish people. And that's really easy to relate to because we see so much anti-Semitism now all over the place. Like so many Jews in France have left recently and gone to Israel. And throughout history, we had the Russians, the Ethiopians, we had the survivors after World War II. So there's a lot of history that shows how Israel is a place of refuge for us.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads us to a nice activity. It's actually from the Musar booklet for this month, but it can be done in relation to any of the curricula for this month, and that's making a class Shaviti or a Mizrach. You can do a personal one for each kid, or you can do one for the class where they, so the kids can put it in a place that's, their room or their personal refuge space, or you can put one in the class, and you can start each class by kind of focusing on it. And this connects the students to the idea that Israel is a place of refuge. And if you choose to make a Shaviti, you can also connect to the concept that prayer doesn't have to be done with words. Contemplating a visual image can be a powerful and meditative process too. So you can create a class Shaviti and focus on it at the beginning of the class. Traditionally, as you know, it's a ritual object that has the four-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He. Traditional Jews consider this name so holy that they don't pronounce it or write it. And I would have trouble making a Shaviti with my class that had that on it. But you can use other names for God. And actually, we're going to be talking about other names for God a little bit later in the webinar. The Yod He Vav He is known as Hashem, the name, and the original meaning is he who is, or he who brings being into being. And I always love the fact that it's supposed to sound like a breath, technically. And I think that's great. And I know that here, I'm just going to mute David for a minute. So you can make it as simple as an index card, like I said, or if you want, you can use the directions that you see here on the slide, and I'm going to send you a PDF of the slide so you can use these directions if you want to. And actually, this is a photograph of my Shaviti, which is right here, which is not technically on my eastern wall because I live on a boat and it moves. Right now, east is over there, but my thing's over here. But anyway, I think it's a great activity to bring in a physical way the spiritual refuge of Israel. And again, if you have any comments, by all means, just jump in. And so continuing our focus on Israel and turning more to the topic of trust, coming through to the Musar materials, Israel has struggled with a tension between faith and self-reliance in a way that relates to a personal struggle many people share. The Musar curriculum for this month explores trust in others and in ourselves. And this text on the screen is from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. We understand that trust in others and in ourselves is an important midah to cultivate. And while we explore the Jewish concept of trust in God, we understand that it's a challenging belief for some Jews today. So the question is how we might combine a trust in God, something outside of ourselves, with a trust in ourselves and in others. So before reading this text, I want to give a little activity that can focus students on this concept. Show students a coin or a bill, and have them find the reference to God on it. And you'll see that our money says, "In God we trust" on it. So then have the students divide into groups. Those who can affirm the statement, "In God we trust," those who aren't sure, and those who actually can't affirm it. And before the discussion begins, remind each group to define the word trust and also define their concept of God. And then a volunteer from each of the three groups can share their definitions with the class and state the case for or against trusting in God. And then after you do this, you can come together as a class and ask, is there a way that trusting in oneself or others need not be seen as a rejection of a trust in God? That's kind of one of the debates that they had when they were putting together the Israeli Declaration of Independence. So if you look at this text on the screen, the historical background to this text helps us understand the evolution of the trust from a purely religious notion about God to notion of self-reliance as part of how we know Israel today. So Jewish religious leaders wanted the declaration to clearly refer to God. And the secular leaders wanted a real separation of church and state. So they put in the words Rock of Israel. And that was a compromise. David Ben-Gurion said that for him, the phrase Rock of Israel meant either the Bible or the Israeli army. So let's look at the words. And I put them in green. And you'll notice, to me, this was a big difference. The word rock is not capitalized. I think it would be very different if it was capitalized. Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel, we set our hand to this declaration at the session of the Provincial Council of State on the soil of the homeland in the city of Tel Aviv on this Sabbath Eve, the 5th of Iyar, 5708, the 14th day of May, 1948. So the discussion that follows might include, among other things, what are some names for God that are ambiguous enough that agnostics could feel comfortable using them, like Source of Life or Mystery or Rock of Israel. Someone suggested Teacher of Torah. And that's also something to keep in mind. If you're going to make the Shaviti, you might want to put something like that. You might want to make it a more agnostic Shaviti if that it suits your class better.
Right.
And it's very interesting. On another webinar, I was talking, there's bitachon and there's emunah. And emunah I see as more of a faith-based trust, or I see bitachon as more of a rational trust. You know what I mean? Anyone want to weigh in on that?
I always thought of bitachon as more of a physical security.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it can be translated as trust, but yeah, it's more like a security. I agree. So that's interesting. And then if you want to look at this Declaration of Independence and you want to expand more, the United States Declaration of Independence actually refers specifically to God. It says, to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So it's interesting. You can look at this reference to God in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Rock of Israel in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. I think that part of it might be that the American Declaration of Independence was written many years before the Israeli one. And I think that God has become less something that everybody talks about. It. You know, there are more ideas about it now.
That is definitely true.
Yeah. When I worked for Milton back in the 80s and they did kids stuff, Eddie Rauch, who was the co-director, he said that it was interesting to him that he found, because, you know, he came from Argentina, and he said, in America, like, Hebrew school teachers are afraid to talk about God. And he found that to be very interesting, that we have had a problem with that. I mean, I don't think the Orthodox schools have a problem with it, but I think all the rest find it to be something that they very much don't feel so comfortable talking about. So that's interesting. And if you want to also do more comparisons between the Israeli Declaration of Independence and the American one, I'll add links to the full text of both of them. So you can do more with that, because I think kids find that interesting. I know when I've done it, they've gotten into that. So, and now to put the struggle into more context, you know, as we were saying before, the modern state of Israel came into being in the aftermath of World War II. And it's not uncommon for survivors and those who lost their families to struggle with emunah, with like a real trust, because they always ask, where was God during the Holocaust? So I love this text. You might already know about it. It's from our new Aseret curriculum, which is going to be coming out in the fall. And I can tell you more about that later. But this is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. It talks about God in Auschwitz. When I first stood at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the question that haunted me was not where was God? God was in the command, you shall not murder. God was in the words, you shall not oppress the stranger. God was saying to humanity, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. God did not stop the first humans eating forbidden fruit. He did not stop Cain committing murder. He did not stop the Egyptians enslaving the Israelites. God did not save us from ourselves. That, according to the Talmud, is why creating man was such a risk that the angels advised against it. The question that haunts me after the Holocaust, as it does today in this new age of chaos, is where is man? So I think that's very powerful, and I think that's something to use when students have trouble believing in God, or use that as kind of an argument against God. And that can get into a whole discussion of whether we have free will or not, which if anybody wants to weigh in, I'm happy to discuss.
Oh, I like that, because one of the conversations I've had with kids many times was asking them how God interacts in the world today versus the way God interacted in the world to our ancestors and then in Torah times, in Bible times. And a lot of them will agree that God was more of a specific force back then than God is now, that God was much more tangible to them than God is now. And this kind of turns that whole argument and that whole line of reasoning on its side, because it's saying, you know, that if that's true, then where was God when these other things happened?
Right.
So God's role is not much different today than it was then. The question is, the last word, where is man? What is it that we believe? What is it how is it that we react?
Exactly. And it puts it in, I think, a different perspective and a more accurate one where responsibility falls. And where it's interesting, this Hasera curriculum is great. It's about the 10 Commandments as core values. And as we've been working on it with this rabbi, Nitzan Bergman, we've been having these real debates about how do you see God and what is our responsibility as humans. It's going to be a great curriculum, but part of it is exactly what we're talking about now. It's whose responsibility is it? Do we have free will? I think that we do, but we are given guidance that we either choose to follow or not follow, or sometimes we're confused and, it's hard to know what's right, but I think we have to, look at our tradition and learn from it. So it's interesting. And this kind of leads nicely into something from the mixtape, which is from Anne Frank. And it's interesting too, because just in her time, it shows how her trust in God, even she's hiding, but she has a trust in God. And you can see how this resonates or doesn't resonate with your students who are pretty close to Anne Frank's age. Their world has different faith testing events happening. And it's interesting to see what they think. Here it is. Who has inflicted this upon us? Who has made us Jews different from all other people? Who has allowed us to suffer so terribly up till now? It is God that has made us as we are. But if it will be God, too, who will raise us up again, if we bear all this suffering, and if there are still Jews left when it's over, then Jews, instead of being doomed, will be held up as an example. Who knows? It might even be our religion from which the world and all peoples learn good. And for that reason, and that reason alone, do we have to suffer now. We can never become just Netherlanders or just English or representatives of any country for that matter. We will always remain Jews, but we want to, too. So I think that's so interesting to look at that in the light of today and to our students who are pretty much the same age. And I wonder if they see things the same way or not. And certainly if you look at Israel, part of the standard curriculum talks about Israel as an example to other countries and as, leaders in the world. And to some extent that's true. I think we're very fast to point out nowadays all the the opposites, like what's wrong, like the founding fathers as slave owners, um, I think there's always two sides to everything, but I think that maybe we're not emphasizing or being very even-handed. So it's interesting to see how Anne Frank sees this.
Yeah.
And then Matt Barr asked some really interesting questions, which I think would be great for anybody to discuss. How do you account for the Jews' unique and unfolding history? Anne Frank said, it might even be our religion from which the world and all peoples learn good. And for that reason, and that reason alone, do we have to suffer now? So do you agree with that? And if you do, why? And if you don't, why?
I don't feel that questions like that are on the level of my students' thinking. I really don't see how I can use that with 7th through 10th graders.
Interesting. I would think the 10th graders, but maybe not the 7th. How do you think?
I apologize. It's 9th graders. I occasionally have the 10th graders. So the only part of this curriculum I do with them is that conscious and ethical Seder we're working on, the mindful and conscious Seder. But besides that, I usually don't do it with them. So 7th through 9th grade.
So how would you look at this with those kids? What would you find to be a from this? So you're doing.
I think it's okay for them to, because they're starting to question things, but like I was a little uncomfortable when you said that, like they feel that in America our Hebrew schools don't teach about God or aren't comfortable with it. I don't know how a teacher can be comfortable with teaching about God. And when they're older, they do have feelings about God, or like around the 10th grade, some of them claim they're more agnostic. But I guess I have problems with this age group. I think it's still okay to talk about what we believe God is and direct them to how they can think about how they connect with God, rather than separating them and saying, if you're agnostic, then go in this group and discuss this section. If you don't believe in God, or if you do believe in God, go here. I don't know. It's just
I like a lot that you're saying that, because two things about it I really like that you're saying. One is these are younger students, and you're right. I don't think that's for younger students. And secondly, I'm really happy to see that there are still places where we do feel comfortable talking about God. The thing that Eddie Rauch said was not a positive. It was a negative. Yeah. I think that they're coming to synagogue and they're learning Jewish texts, and they're learning other Jewish, things. And yes, we should. I know that there are Jewish people who consider themselves Jewish but don't believe in God. We went to a Seder a couple years ago. It didn't make, yeah, right. And I think I like to be open and not judgmental. But when you're teaching students and they're in a Jewish school, I think that it is appropriate to teach a belief in God.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because we all question, like as we get older, we don't believe the same way as when we're younger, but I feel we have to steer them in that direction so that they can make a connection and their own decision when they're older.
Right. And I think part of the thing that's been wrong, that's been bad for us, is that we haven't always done that. I was even shocked years ago when my kids went to Schechter. I am not making this up. We went back to school night, and they said, we tell the children that maybe the Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, or maybe it's a compilation of many different authors. I really didn't want, I know there are people who think that, and that's fine, but not for children, in my opinion, anyway.
Absolutely.
Right. So I accept that. I accept it happens, but
I have one of my students next to me. My 9th grade daughter, unfortunately, has me for a teacher. unfortunately.
Well, that's awesome. So if she would like to chime in, any thoughts are very appreciated.
Chime in, Gina, whenever you want. Tell us how children your age feel. She says she just protests going to Sunday school.
Even with all these interesting things going on, all these interesting thoughts.
She's doing a great job on her section for our Seder. So, yeah.
Well, share it with us on Facebook when you get there.
Yeah, it's so hard because I feel like a lot of our teaching time was taken away due to Purim stuff, and then now it's spring break for 2 weeks, and it's like I just want to get it done. I'm so anxious, but it's like all the time keeps getting taken away.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common feeling.
Yeah.
But one question that I think is interesting at any age also is asking the kids, do you feel responsible to carry on Jewish tradition? Because I think that's something that we definitely want to build into our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that we hope that they will internalize that in whatever age or stage that they're at. So that's
and it's important to instill it when they're young, because I was talking with another mother yesterday, and she was saying that growing up, okay, her and her sister, they grew up in the same household, they were taught the same things religiously, and her sister went totally the opposite way. She had this really bad experience somewhere she went, and she kind of turned against it for a while. But then she got married and had children, and now it's back to being important to her, and says, I want to do, and now she's like involved in all this Jewish activity. It goes to say, those college years, even though I think Hillel on campuses are doing a lot better job and stuff, I think, I think we still lose that age group. But if you teach it right from the beginning, or at least we're doing what we can now, hopefully they'll return to it just like this woman did,
I've seen that happen many times. And you can't always predict what it's going to be, although, as you know, there are many studies about it. And, we just have to try to do the best we can with all the touch points we have, which is one of the reasons it's interesting to have discussions based on text, but that can kind of go anywhere, because I think that makes them more relevant when the kids get going on them. And that brings me to other highlights of our things for this month, which is this is an activity actually that will be good for younger kids. Tikkun Olam Israeli style. It's from the standard curriculum. It's a worksheet, which is good for you, David, because your teacher wants to write. And I've done it with like 7th graders, and they loved it. Students imagine that they're Israeli inventors, and they invent a new app. It's creative. It highlights Israel's amazing tech industry. And so what I would do is I'll go online, I'll find what the top 10 apps are that have come from Israel recently, and I'll let the kids know what they are. And then we'll discuss things that are like beneficial, like what would make them good. And then it's cute. It's a paper you can print out. It has a little square, and they can design the logo for the app, and they can write what the app is and what it does. So that's fun.
That's fun.
Yeah. And then this other one, the trust test, is very nice too. When you talk about bitachon or emunah, it's one of those things where you make a line of people with your arms outstretched, and each person's touching the one next to them, and then one person's a runner who comes running across, and you have to see if they have to drop their arms when he comes and see if he flinches or slows down, or if you trust them to lower their arms. So it's kind of it's nice too if your kids need to. Yeah. And then all of the April mixtapes videos, which are on our website, are really good. There's one, Light is in the Air. It's like a complete history of the Jewish people. If you do the closed captions and you read the words, it's great. And I'm Not White, I'm Jewish is an interesting rap. Talks about Jewish pride. And then Never Again talks about the Holocaust. You have to watch it first. You either love it or you'll be very uncomfortable from it.
Where's the link for that?
I'll send you the link. It's on our website, and I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Very interesting to see that. And of course, all the curricula have additional stuff, but these are ones that I especially wanted to point out.
What was the first one called again?
Light is in the Air. It's awesome. It's Matt Barr was at some kind of an event with a lot of teens, and he's talking about light, and they're all holding candles, and it's really interesting. It talks about Moses, and it talks about the Greeks, and it just goes through the whole history. It's really interesting. And it talks about how the light is still in us. It's a really nice video. So that is that. And I also have to remind, neither of you are doing mixtapes, but if anybody is watching this later, they're putting together things that Matt Barr will edit into a nice class video. So it's time to start collecting the stuff that they're going to send Matt. So he'll do that. And I think that is pretty much, if you want to know more about the Asera curriculum, send me an email. And that is basically it, unless people have comments or questions.
No, sounds good.
Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward, Debbie, I really want to see your Seder when you have it.
So do I. I can't wait till it's done. I mean, I'm having fun with it, and I think they're like, they needed a lot of help with getting, their ideas coming to fruition, but, hopefully it's something we'll all be proud of, but I'll send it either way.
Great. I really want to see it. I know it's going to be good. You're putting a lot of work.
I was really impressed because I thought I needed the rabbi to come in and help with add some prayers or, Hebrew text to it. And actually a couple of them, including Gina, found their own, because I gave them some source, like the Siddur, Sim Shalom, and I just, different Siddurs they could look through as Siddurim. And they found some really, really neat ones that refer to their little topics. So
that's great.
Yeah,
that's
I was
great.
Impressed. So
that's
sometimes
great.
They'll surprise you.
That's right. That's it. If you let them do it, they will.
Yes.
True. Can we have access to your slides there? Because I think I'd like to use some of your quotes.
Yes, thanks. I'm actually going to make a PDF of it, and all the links will be, and I'll send you that.
Perfect.
The way it works. Great.
Perfect.
All right. Well, great. Thanks again for joining.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for putting it together.
Thanks.
And,
right.
and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.